Greetings, watch lovers, and welcome to Watches in the Wild. Today we are going to compare a Seiko and a Grand Seiko. Watches with overlaps in most categories, except, of course, price. Before we dive into details, let me invite you inside the best Japanese restaurant I know of, the Jens in Zurich. The similarities between the two watches are no accident, given that both are produced by the same company. Though Grand Seiko split off its parent company in 2018, it still remains linked to its design heritage, which dates back all the way to 1960. As you can see, my example here is a variation of the iconic Grand Seiko Snowflake introduced in 2010, sharing its case, proportions, and even its dial layout, hands and indices. As opposed to the Snowflake, the SPGA 435 is manufactured in steel and features a more striking dial pattern. It's like a scene of miniature clouds intermingling, showcasing incredible detail and more contrast than you find on a Snowflake dial. Compare that to the Seiko Starbar, which has a special dial too, arguably an even more special one, since the honeycomb pattern seems to be exclusive to this limited edition only. Whereas you will find the Grand Seiko's pattern on other models too, if in different color variations. Not only is the dial made up of dozens of tiny sextagons, those parts differ themselves, with some featuring a more rough surface and a slightly different tone in color. Now, admittedly, it doesn't quite match the miniature artwork of the GS, but it is darn impressive too, and arguably more special. What's more, it looks great in all lighting conditions, whether we're talking the summer sun of Zurich, evening after sunset, or an environment with artificial lights such as the Jens restaurant. Compare that to the GS, which looks positively jaw-dropping in some environments, especially in the shadows, but washed out and downright unremarkable in others, for instance when hit by direct sunlight. Since I'm not only moving from shadow to shadow, I actually do prefer the Seiko dial, even though the GS is more impressive under ideal conditions. Moving on to the dial furniture, the GS is a standout with its hand-polished indices reflecting backlight in uniform fashion, showing the utmost care taken to making these little parts as perfect as can be. I'm a fan of the trapezoidal shapes chosen for the 12, 6 and 9 position, which are far more original than just doubling up the indices and more labor-intensive to finish. Taking a look at the Seiko dial, we find a total of 5 different indices, some shorter to accommodate the cutout of the open heart. They are nicely finished. One would hardly complain about them except when comparing the finish directly to GS, which takes it up a notch or two. The case finish is perhaps where GS shows off most, featuring extremely fine delineation between brushed and polished surfaces. Add to that the case flanks, which don't just fall off straight, but slope downwards ever so gently, giving them a more handmade look. Knowing that this was achieved by eye-hand coordination further endows it with a touch of warmth and humanity. It is all in all very impressive. Contrary to other opinions, I have to praise the execution of the bracelet too, which shows fine beveling at the edges of the links and is surprisingly comfortable to wear despite the lack of micro-adjustment. The Seiko is lagging behind here, featuring but an industrial finish and no frills added to the somewhat generic case. But then again, and I've mentioned that before, not afraid to annoy and enrage thousands of Grand Seiko fanboys, the mostly high-polished case of the GS is a source of anxiety as well. It gets scratched even by a summer breeze touching it. It's a beauty, but somewhat impractical, with 90% of its case flanks featuring high polish. Lastly, the movements. Undoubtedly, GS comes out on top here with its fusion of both mechanical and quartz technology, although purists might object to the presence of the quartz crystal, of course. Oh, and I think literally everybody objects to that lion logo on the back, whose only mission seems to be to obstruct the view of that movement. Well, mission accomplished. On the other hand, the Seiko is perhaps not a movement watch lovers might have wet dreams about, but it is proven, solid and rather accurate. At any given time it may be 2 or 3 seconds ahead of the spring drive, which is pretty negligible. So whereas the spring drive with its 1 second per day accuracy didn't surprise me, my expectations were exceeded by the Seiko, which almost keeps up with Grand Seiko's Opus Magnum despite being entry level and fully mechanical. In conclusion, the GS of course outperforms the Seiko, boasting more details, better finished case and dial, a superior movement and a surprisingly luxurious bracelet. I'd say in its price bracket it offers better value for money, outperforming pretty much every other brand around the $5,000 mark. Contrast that with the Seiko, which compares only slightly favorably to value brands like Orient, for instance. Having said that, my heart has been stolen by that Seiko. It has better proportions and is surprisingly accurate. It is less of a scratch magnet and thus more relaxing to wear. And it boasts a truly unique dial which looks great in any light. And a second hand which contrasts the dial nicely, another area where the GS falls short. But now I gotta leave them both alone and finally finish the sushi which I've been filming for about an hour without touching it. I suggest you consider rewarding that almost masochistic self-control with a click on that subscribe button. Thanks for watching and see you again soon.